I call Simon O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member who's just resumed her seat for what I think is a really helpful contribution and continuing what is the good work in the Health Select Committee, which will be considering after this first reading the Radiation Safety Bill. It'll be the second bill before our committee, and the Honourable Annette King has just referred to the first one that we've been looking at. It's the one around the Health Protection Amendment Bill. It's dealing with contact tracing first and foremost, but also has provisions around the use of salaria or sunbeds. As was raised by the previous member and the Minister earlier, this bill is to do with ionising radiation. I do not presume to be a chemist or a physicist, a scientist or anything of that nature, but what we're talking about here in terms of ionising radiation is that I won't claim false accolades or knowledge, but what we're talking about here is the radiation that liberates or releases electrons in order to create energy. This is electrons basically being taken off atoms and molecules, which enables us to undergo an array of radiation-based therapies. Within the medical sphere, most of us will know X-rays, of course. CT scans have become quite popular as well, and a range of radiation-based therapies. One of the ones that the Minister referred to, which this bill will deal with, is the use of something like irradiated iodine. It's been highly successful around thyroid cancers and the like. For the men on this side of the House, brachytherapy. Well, I'm not really sure I want to indulge the House. It's to do with prostate cancer and the use of irradiated items which are put somewhere. But very effective. But again, a radiation-based system, for particularly on the other side of the gender, but it can also be within breast cancer for both male and female, effectively like irradiated plastic rods which can be inserted into the breast and which will be able to isolate that particular cancer. And again, using something like brachytherapy, a radiation device or an item, again, very targeted, and as modern medicine urologists and others will tell you, a fascinating technology, been in use for a long time now. But I use that and share those briefly, I say to my colleagues, briefly, to give a bit of context about what this radiation safety bill is about. We've heard from others wondering why the non-ionising forms of treatment are not being covered by this radiation safety bill. It's a pretty logical distinction. The things such as MRIs, so a lot of people would think of MRI scans in the same way that think of X-rays and CT scans, but an MRI scan is not using ionising radiation. It is using magnetism. It's non-ionising, in the same way that sunbeds or salaria are, in the same way that, well, actually a whole range of equipment, got some noted down here, everything from cell phone sites, power lines and Wi-Fi. Those are quite distinct. I know some constituents often get concerned about these non-ionising elements. They would be wondering why we are not regulating, say, the likes of smart meters, Wi-Fi and cell phones in this bill. The non-ionising aside, it's pretty clear when you read the research in good peer-reviewed scientific journals, in fact referred to New Zealand's National Radiation Authority, that these provide very little harm to New Zealanders. What we're talking about is ultimately ionising highly radioactive substances which need to be rightly regulated. Mr Speaker, this bill is sitting about to replace the Radiation Protection Act of 1965. It has served us well. I know there's been some concerns from the other side that we've taken a while to get here. Well, to use the axiomatic phrase, good things take time. The previous bill has been working well, but it is time for reform. And you are seeing that quite clearly in the health sector from the national government, a slow and steady approach which is making real differences. And I think when we consider this radiation safety bill, you can see it sitting on the back of great work that particularly has been done by this government in the area of oncology, so that's in the area of cancer cancer treatments. Really stunning results that the government is turning around there, and I think it's important to acknowledge particularly those working in the radiotherapy fields, the nurses, doctors, technicians and so forth, who are leading the charge. But it's important that we make sure the legislation is correctly and properly up to date to enable them to do their job for Kiwis, and in fact maybe for some in this House in the past or in the future. So, as has been noted, it is about modernising the law. That's one of the key elements of this Parliament. It's replacing the existing Act, Mr Speaker, allowing safety and security developments since the 1960s to be incorporated. You'll forgive me if I turn to the Bill Digest, because there's, I think, one thing that's quite important here. Whenever we start talking about radiation, people often jump to things nuclear for a variety of reasons, and are concerned that this might affect New Zealand's status. I think, to quote, nothing in this bill, Mr Speaker, affects or derogates from the New Zealand Nuclear-Free Zone, Disarmament and Arms Control Bill of 1987, nor the Nuclear Test Ban of 1999. In fact, the provisions of the bill will apply in conjunction with the provisions of the Atomic Energy Act of 1945. Mr Foster-Bell, I didn't actually realise we had one of those. So this bill does not affect the nuclear side, but it does actually help New Zealand complete its international obligations around the convention, the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, and the amendment to the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material. So as people understand, New Zealand signs up to an array of agreements from time to time. I think in the House prior we've talked around bunker oil conventions, its human rights conventions and so on. This bill is also helping to implement a variety of conventions around the radiological space. I talked a bit earlier, Mr Speaker, around some of the human elements to this. I think it needs to be said that particularly in the veterinarian space, this bill will also apply. They use similar techniques, x-rays and the like, for our beloved pets and the like, and it goes without saying that obviously there is the industrial and the research side. If you go to any of our universities, you'll often see the radiation sign up. They are conducting their own research. Again, you just need to go to the medical labs and so forth, even our own private medical providers. So the bill is ultimately going to establish that a person who deals with radiation must ensure that, I think this is really important because it affects medicine in general, but that the expected benefits to people in society dealing with this radiation source outweigh the risks. I'm no doctor, but I'm assuming that when a doctor is making those choices, say around an oncological treatment, brachytherapy, radiated iodine, I knew I was going to get tongue twisted on that tonight, we'll be trying to decide whether the use of this radiation is going to actually do more harm than good. I mean, by its very nature is doing some form of harm in order to achieve a good in the end, but this bill really wants to make that quite key. It's making sure that the magnitude of individual doses of ionising radiation that people are going to be exposed to is limited. And you begin to see this if you actually go through the bill, particularly in Schedules 2 onwards. So Schedule 2, I'm not encouraging, well, the House should surely look at it, but those at home, there's about 20 or 30 pages which list all the different types of radioactive material, and I'm sure that will be an ongoing list and what is the acceptable levels. But quite importantly, and for those at home that are interested, and of course you can access the website easy enough, Schedule 3 begins to outline the dose limits around radiation, what can look like big numbers at times when you're talking about 20 millisieverts or 50, again in terms of radiation are quite low doses. So we are working on that. Schedule 4 is in relation to the Radiation Safety Advisory Council. It's an important element of this bill, Mr Speaker, that we are also introducing along with what radiation can be used, dosage and so forth, that we are going to establish a Radiation Safety Advisory Council. It's replacing what was once known as the Protection Advisory Council. We're putting a whole lot of functions in play there again. A bill here here that is modernising, and a bill that I think is showing the National Party's commitment not only to good legislation, clear legislation, timely legislation, but one that has the health and safety of Kiwis in mind. And speaking as the chair of the committee, the two bills before us already immensely symbolic of that, as we look at, as I said earlier, contact tracing, how we can better work the epidemiological well, I suppose, whakapapa, for want of a better word, lineage, genealogy of disease, what we're doing around sunbeds, again, that non-ionising side, which is why this bill is not dealing with it, because it's been adequately approached there, and then this bill in particular around the whole use of radiation. Mr. Speaker, I think that is a somewhat summation of this bill, and I look forward to it coming before my committee.
Awesome.